Recently, an independent research firm ran a taste test between Coke and Pepsi. And the taste more people chose was the taste of Coca-Cola. Yes, more people all across the country, when comparing Coke to Pepsi, chose the taste of Coke as the better taste. Let's look at it this way. We gave America a choice, and more people said Coke is it.
It's a hit. It's a Coke. Coke is it.
What you are witnessing isn't real. The participants are not actors. They're actual litigants with no case pending in the California Municipal Court. Both parties have agreed to dismiss their court cases and have their disputes settled here in our forum. The Social Media Court.
Hello, I'm Don Blue Island, and welcome to the People's Court. This is the case of Love Me, Love My Synthesizer.
Camera 2? It, I'll do it live. Oh, hey, what's up, guys? Let's have the big talk about what happened this weekend. Now, this video was something that I've actually thought about doing for a good 2 or 3 years now, and just never really got around to it. And you know, with what happened this weekend, probably a good time to finally have the talk. That's right, we're gonna talk about everybody's favorite topic, Behringer. Unless you were maybe living under a rock, or you were in a coma, you probably got the spicy drama this weekend. And I'd imagine if you watch this channel, you probably pay attention to synthesizer news, because I don't really know why else you'd watch my channel. Behringer, well, they unveiled a new product. And the reason I didn't do a video about it is I wanted to have a little bit of time to reflect on it, because I'm going to be honest, even as a pretty big Behringer fan, I felt a little weird about it. It's still tacky, but it's honestly not a big deal. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of feelings wrapped up in the synth community. Brand loyalty is a pretty big deal. You might have caught some kind of subtext at the beginning of this video, but it's not really anything new. Corporations rip each other off all the time, and it seems really weird if you're emotionally invested in brands. And I'm not gonna say I don't get, feels about brands. I just blew way too much money on a vintage replica of a couple synths because of the way they make me feel. I try to keep that in perspective. The thing is it's really easy to blow things out of perspective. If you look at really the history of innovation in corporations, usually competition is the big thing that spurs things on. Spurs things on? One of the two. History is essentially replete with corporations battling for your dollars and my dollars. If you have something that's called a monopoly, on a market, it tends to stagnate progress, and it also tends to inflate prices. Some companies don't really care because their brand name is so well known in whatever industry they are, and they have such a strong brand loyalty from their consumer base that they don't really have to, or at least they think they don't have to address the lower market. The problem is if you stay on top for too long and you don't have any real challenger, eventually what happens if you keep your prices too high for too long, and some companies might want to pay attention to this, some companies that I love dearly should be aware that if you don't address the entry market for too long, you're going to build resentment towards your brand name because people are going to think, oh, this is only for rich, and they're going to find a company that does address their pocketbook and their spending habits. If you do that for too long, those very consumers are going to develop brand loyalty towards that brand. If you look at Behringer's history, especially if you're maybe new to following what they do, whether it's because you're new to the synth market or music making in general, Behringer's always been a company that's, let's just say, is deeply inspired by their competition. It's not anything new. Growing up, buying Behringer products from time to time, they always had a stigma around them of, oh, those are the guys that make cheap garbage knockoffs with low quality or lower quality. And that's kind of always been a moniker that they had. I have a MX-9000 that I bought almost 20 years ago, and it's still going strong. So that comes from the era that they were known to be making, quote unquote, garbage products that fall apart. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that they don't have any products that are super low end where maybe the quality's not super great, but a lot of companies do. I'm going to say another thing that's going to be highly contentious, just about the synth market in general. Every single one of the companies that I like, that are the top of the mountain for name brand recognition and supposed quality, has put out products with quality control issues. Take the Prophet 5, for example. Prophet 5 Rev 4 that I have in my studio. Well, we all know about the controversy or the non-controversy of their quality control issue. I have a Prophet 6 that I never bothered to send in that has an issue that when I turn it on, and this has been since I pulled it out of the package, it's got some sort of weird issue where I have to turn it on and let it warm up, and turn it off and turn it back on, and turn it on and let it warm up. Sometimes it just turns straight on. When I contacted, at the time, DSI, which is now again Sequential, they told me, yeah, sure, we'll go ahead and fix it, but you need to pay for shipping to get it to us. It's only because I bought it probably about 4 or 5 months after it launched, so most of the hype had died down. They didn't offer to totally take care of it because it wouldn't be an issue if someone went online and complained about it. The reason that they're taking care of the Prophet 5 issue is nobody wants a botched launch to be marred by the only thing, being talked about online is the fact that, hey, they sent out a bunch of defects. So they did a good strategic move on covering their ass by offering to swap it out and trade it. And that's great, but, it's a PR move. It's not because Sequential or DSI are saints. My Moog Sub 37. It's got that weird notch issue in the filter that anyone who bought an early Sub 37 knows about, which I'm not entirely sure that they even fixed until they made the subsequent 37. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but it is a pretty common known issue, and at the time, the Sub 37 was a pretty expensive synth. Really, the issue of quality control and how basically companies deal with that, it's not a Behringer issue. People want to make it a Behringer issue. It's just a corporation issue. Back to the big issue at hand right now, the swing is definitely inspired by something. Oh yeah, the key step. Is it tacky? It's pretty tacky. They should have, in my opinion, maybe changed the body up a little bit and added some more functionality to it. Or maybe they should have waited until their DAW that's supposedly coming, it's going to be free to everyone. Maybe they should have waited to put it out till then, so they could have made that a front and center feature as a delineation. It still would have been kind of tacky to clone something that's in production right now and not really change it much, but it's par for the course. The MX series was widely known to be inspired by Mackie. Then there was like the V amp, which was, I had one of those until I got my Line 6 XT Pro before it got stolen. It looked different than the pod. Like, it looked like a guitar body, whereas in the pod just looked like a pod. So I think maybe part of the issue is that the swing looks just like a key step. Maybe there's also a thing in the synth community, and maybe it's just a sign of the times and things have changed, but growing up, I never really knew in the musician community so much vitriolic hatred for Behringer. Maybe guitar players are different. Maybe studio musicians are less precious. Maybe synth folks are really into brand loyalty. I don't know. What do you guys think? Have you given much thought to standard business practices with corporations competing with one another, or the fact that Behringer cloning and copying products isn't a new thing? Am I wrong? I don't know. When you get down to it, I personally think that there is a lot of gatekeeping in our community, a lot of unacknowledged gatekeeping. There's a lot of collectors that are not happy about what Behringer's doing because it's a perceived threat to the value of their vintage gear. Not only is it a perceived threat to the monetary value, which in some cases has been big, in other cases not really seeming to have stifled the price of the vintage stuff. I think the last time I checked on the SH-101, which I previously had an SH-101 in my studio for about 2 years, when the MS-101, MS-1, whatever they changed it to, when that came out, after having an MS-1 and an SH-101 in my studio, I didn't see the need for the headache to own a piece of vintage gear which by the way, wasn't perfectly functional. I just didn't see the need. I did enough comparisons and I saw enough comparisons like this one. Yeah, that one. There's just a strangeness in our community of synth lovers to hold on to this notion, which strangely comes very loudly from a lot of folks that I've seen their synthesizer studios, their photos in the groups, in the forums, showing off what they have. They don't own any vintage stuff. And most of them have never owned any vintage stuff. And they don't hear it often enough from people that do, that know that real vintage stuff is a super big headache. And there seems to be just this strange, like I said, loyalty and hatred. Loyalty for this concept of owning vintage stuff and this fantasy of owning vintage stuff, and a hatred for the one company that's actually making it super viable to own these legendary synths. I know that's going to be a contentious how I phrase that, but these clones are as close to the real thing. Another unpopular opinion, but true, especially if you've owned any vintage stuff and you've gone through multiple units. One vintage unit compared to another one from the same year is not gonna sound the same. It's not gonna behave the same. It's gonna be in the ballpark, just as much in the ballpark as anything Behringer's put out. And frankly, another strange part of this whole topic is that if any other company was showing off the products that Behringer shows off at NAMM, especially if they were not a big company, they would be praised, heralded as, restoring legacy and bringing something back. I have followed for years the cloning community. I'll throw a couple names down there, and I'll probably bing, bing, bing. Yeah, there's cloning isn't anything new, and when other companies do it, they get a pass, but not when Behringer does. Studio Electronics, who I love. I had a SEO1 for a brief period of time in my studio, and I have an SEO2. They started out rehousing Moog synthesizers and restoring other vintage synths. The SEO1 is a mini Moog with presets. I mean, the Roland gets a pass for doing that? Studio Electronics? Nobody that I know ever gave them shit for it back in the day when they first came onto the scene. In fact, if you lived through the 90s and the early 2000s, Studio Electronics was carrying the torch for analog when analog was all but dead. In fact, analog had already been dead more or less for a considerable period of time. Korg didn't catch a rash of garbage for bringing back the MS-20. They didn't really get any heat for bringing back, some heat for bringing back the ARP. All they did is pay David Friend. It's just one thing after another, and the hate train never ends for Behringer. And people are definitely entitled to their feelings. Like, what are you getting for all that hate that you put out there? What are you getting personally from being upset about what one corporation does, or what one corporation does and another corporation, which, I think it's cute and entertaining that Arturia responded with this. It's really weird because Arturia responding to it is kind of part of this strange phenomenon of corporations and entities becoming people on social media.
Hey there, fellow kids. It's me, a human. I've just come to ask, what's the deal with being a millennial? Student debt, am I right? Well, it's worth noting that I, as a human, also hate student debt. I don't want to be negative AF, but life can be full of fakers. And what really slaps these days is realness. You see, I'm real. And that's great because today's youths want something real, something authentic. They don't want Leave It to Beaver or those whack posers at Clever Crevice. No. They want a pickle rolling around in rat feces. Have I asked you to decimate that bell yet so that you can know whenever an episode drops or podcasting live? It would really help me fill my purpose. I sometimes get sad, so subscribing to Culture Binge on RSS would really do a lot to help with my seasonal depression. Please be my friend.
It's not really something that a company would have responded to 10 years ago. They just move on. But because they know the heat and the hype, they get involved too. It's gonna sell more products ultimately for Arturia in a lot of ways because it's free hype. They get to look like victims in this whole scenario. Cloning is also super ubiquitous in the Euro-rack space. So if you're a small mom and pop's, quote unquote, mom and pop shop, it's okay to quote unquote blatantly rip off other people's work and live off of their work. I don't know. It seems like a lot of smoke and mirrors for people to justify being sucked into brand loyalty.
I'm Doug Llewellyn, thanking you for joining us and reminding you, if you're involved in a dispute such as this with another party and you just can't seem to work it out, don't take the law into your own hands. You take them to court.